Hello and welcome to today's edition of China Now. I am your host, Makiza Latifa, and I'm super excited to be coming your way with the latest stories from China and beyond. So this is the show where we bring the world a global overview of today's China, how it works, how it thinks, and how it sees itself in the world. We'll start off with China Currents with Chris. In this episode, China and the United States hold crucial talks, revealing fresh efforts to ease tensions and rebuild trust. And in Beijing, authorities uncover what they describe as a major US hacking operation, adding a new twist to the cyber rivalry between both nations. Meanwhile, the Dutch move to block a Chinese takeover of a chip firm is sending ripples through global supply chains, raising concerns across the tech and auto industries. And as tensions rise across the Taiwan Strait, Beijing delivers one of its clearest signals yet on reunification and national sovereignty. So all that and many more are coming your way right here on China Now. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents. In this episode, China-US talks in Kuala Lumpur take baby steps instead of strides. China cracks a US hacking case. Dutch seizure of China's chip firm puts global automakers at risk. China sends clear signals on Taiwan reunification. China's reusable rocket completes key test one step from launch. And world first, spinal cord interface restores walking for quadriplegic patient. Now let's start today's China Currents. First, the US-China tariff talks. On October 25th to 26th, Chinese and US trade teams concluded a two-day consultation in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This marked the fifth round of US-China trade talks following Geneva, London, Stockholm, and Madrid. During more than a day of discussions, both sides focused on US Section 301 measures on China's shipbuilding industries, extending the pause on reciprocal tariffs, fentanyl tariffs and enforcement cooperation, agricultural trade, export controls, and more. The meeting takes place less than a week before the APEC summit in South Korea, with the consensus still out of reach. Though the US described the talks as very constructive, Chinese negotiator Li Chenggang said the US expressed a tough stance, while China firmly defended its interest. Renowned Chinese international relations scholar Jin Canrong inferred that Li's comments suggest that US likely made several aggressive demands and China held its ground. While some basic consensus was reached and progress made, disagreements on trade remain. Meanwhile, outside the trade table, tensions persist. On October 20th, Chinese national security authorities announced the case of US NSA intrusion into China's National Time Service Center. The China Internet Emergency Center released a detailed technical report outlining the attack. The cyber attack spanning March 2022 to June 2024 exploited vulnerabilities in foreign-branded phones used by the center's staff to infiltrate internal networks, conducting monitoring, stealth operations, data theft, and attacks. The National Time Service Center, located in Xi'an, Shanxi Province, provides high-precision standard time for communications, finance, power, transportation, defense, and more. A network failure could disrupt communications, financial systems, power grids, transportation, and even space launches. Following the case's disclosure, Chinese netizens labeled it an act of war. Interestingly, the official report even praised the US, stating, NSA still demonstrate leading skills in operational methods, encrypted communications, and anti-detection evasion. At the same time, the Dutch seizure of Chinese semiconductor firm Nexperia has left European and American automakers scrambling. The timing coincided suspiciously closely with the US imposing new sanctions on Chinese firms. The issue dates to December 2024, when Nexperia's parent Wintech Technology was added to the US entity list. Initially unaffected, Nexperia faced expanded US export restrictions on September 29, 2025, and the following day, the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs froze Nexperia's assets, suspended its Chinese CEO, appointed independent foreign directors, and took control of 99% of the company's shares. In response, China's Ministry of Commerce on October 4th imposed export controls on Nexperia's Chinese subsidiary and subcontractors, banning the export of domestically made components. Given Nexperia's key role in the global EV supply chain, automakers felt the impact. Mercedes-Benz confirmed the short-term supply stability amid the standoff. Volvo, Volkswagen and Nissan could face disruptions. On October 19th, Dutch Minister of Economic Affairs Vincent Karaman announced plans to meet Chinese officials in the coming days to resolve the Xperia impasse. Next, China's latest stance on Taiwan. Last week, the fourth plenary session of the 20th Central Committee concluded, spotlighting cross-strait reunification. Shortly after, China's top legislature declared October 25th the commemoration day of Taiwan's restoration, marking Taiwan's 1945 liberation from Japanese rule and honoring contributions from both sides during the anti-Japanese war. The day also reinforces Taiwan's legal status as part of China. Commentators highlight two words in the official statement: peace, signaling no immediate military action, and advance, emphasizing a gradual process. Looking to the future, China's reusable rocket. China's top commercial aerospace firm Landspace recently completed final ground tests on its reusable Zhuque-3 rocket, bringing it close to launch. From October 18th to 20th, the rocket underwent propellant loading and static ignition tests ahead of a maiden flight that will attempt first-stage recovery. Elon Musk praised Zhuque-3 on X, noting it combines Starship features like stainless steel and Methalox with the Falcon 9 design, potentially outperforming Falcon 9, the only operational reusable rocket with 500-plus launches and a 99% success rate. Scheduled as early as November, Zhuque-3 aims for 20-plus reuses, deploying 18-plus tons per mission for satellite internet. As reuse matures, launch costs could drop to a third. Alongside Tianlong and Long March tests, 2025 may mark a turning point for China's reusable rockets. Finally, a medical breakthrough. Recently, doctors in Northeast China helped a fully quadriplegic patient regain walking ability using a spinal cord interface, the world's first surgery to restore upper limb function via neural control. Mr. Liu, 36, suffered a life-threatening C3 vertebral fracture in a car accident last December, an injury often fatal before hospital arrival. Though he survived the surgery, he had no sensation below the neck and couldn't sit unaided. With family consent, Professor Wu Minfei of Jilin University Second Hospital led the world's first precise neural control spinal cord interface surgery for a quadriplegic patient. Implanted microelectrodes activated Liu's motor neurons, producing slight finger movement within 6 hours. Even without stimulation, his fingers and toes could contract, suggest neural regeneration. This marks the first global restoration of upper limb function in a high-level quadriplegic, proving the brain-to-hand pathway is functional. By early September, Liu could take supported steps. Next, Professor Wu aims to restore independence in daily tasks while developing voice control interfaces to enable full autonomy, the ultimate goal of the technology. And that's all for today. See you next time.
Next on the show, we turn to our Roughly Chinese segment, the space where we dive beneath the headlines to explore deeper perspectives on China and the world at large. In this episode, Mimi sits with Jan Oberg, acclaimed peace researcher and director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. Together, they unpack China's evolving role in global peace building, from mediation efforts to its vision for a more balanced world order, and what all this means for the future of international relations. So please stay tuned. It's an insightful conversation that you wouldn't want to miss.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Roughly Chinese. I'm your host Mimi, and today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, Dr. Jan Oberg. So nice to have you here with us.
Good to be here.
To launch into this extremely exciting discussion that I'm very much anticipating. I would love if you could introduce yourself to our audience, a little bit about who you are and what you do, even though I know our audience is already a big fan of you.
Okay. Well, I am Jan Oberg from Sweden, Danish citizen, immigrated from Denmark to Sweden. And more importantly for this, I am the co-founder with my wife and director of the Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research. We are very small with a long name. So what we are devoted to and have been devoted to actually at New Year for 40 years is to support academically and public education-wise the Article 1 of the United Nations Charter, which says that peace shall be established by peaceful means. That means basically all countries in the world, with the exclusion or with the exception of, let's say, Iceland and Costa Rica, everybody's violating the UN Charter because we are not prepared and not spending much money on preparing ourselves for peaceful ways of achieving peace. We are arming ourselves to death, and that's what we're working against. I'm not a Gandhian because I do not live as clean a life as he did, but we are inspired by Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Sun Tzu, and others who have been intelligent thinkers about how to reduce violence. Now, I see myself as a conflict doctor, meaning if you cannot come up with some solutions that help reduce the disease, you're a bad doctor. And the disease we have in the world at the moment is overuse, like drug, narcotics, drug misuse of weapons. More weapons, more weapons, more weapons. And as everybody knows, we are in a more risky situation now than the world has been since 1945 because of this armament, instead of learning how to deal with conflict. So that's what I'm spending my life on. Apart from that, I'm an art photographer.
Yes. I think that now more than ever before, like you said, peace is a cause that is extremely important to study, to understand, to share with the world. And at the same time, it seems to be almost like a far away, imaginative idea because, like you said, of the militarization, the armament, the billions and billions of dollars spent on arming every country in the world, really, but mostly coming from the heart of the war lovers who are the United States. And
yeah, that's NATO, if you will. It's not only the United States, but led by the US. You have this huge arms industry and arms believing organization called NATO, which I think is something like 60% of the world. It's a few countries, but it's 60% of the world's military expenditures. But I would say everybody is guilty for this misuse, this drug addiction. And to give you an example of it, all the countries who are members of the United Nations spend exactly 100 times more on weapons than everything the UN does, not just the Secretariat or the house in the skyscraper in New York, all the organizations, the FAO, the UNESCO, the WHO, etc., everything, and peacekeeping, everything the UN does is just 1% of the world's military expenditures. Now, these are perverse proportions. These priorities of the world are totally unacceptable if you want to create a more peaceful world in the future. Peace goes through knowing a little bit about how to analyze a conflict and how to do negotiations, diplomacy, whatever it takes to say, instead of weapons and killing each other, because then you just add a problem. If I smash your face now, you will be more angry with me than you were because we had a disagreement about something to begin with. But if I do like this to you, you'll say I'm a bad boy for two reasons, right? So I would say the reason people are using and governments are using weapons is that they are conflict and peace illiterate. It may sound like an arrogant thing to say, but if we could learn about conflict, learn about how to go about it when we disagree about things and come down from the trees, we could create a beautiful world.
That is very moving to me because I think,
thank you.
Like you said, it's not arrogant, it's actually true. I think people don't even know how to fathom conflict resolution or understanding how to create a peaceful world together. And that has been the question on everybody's minds. And so we really need researchers like you who come up with actual answers and who get to share that with the world. I was telling you a little bit before, but I myself lived in New York for quite a long time. I lived in the West for a long time. And I think for so long I was desperately searching for an alternative to what the US calls, the US acts like it is the world. The US acts like it is the core, heart, center of the universe.
Yeah.
And there are actually alternatives out there that we need to continue to research, that we need to continue to study, which I think is very important. And so I wanted to ask you, Jan, what is the defining moment for you that made you want to launch yourself into this work, you and your wife?
I think that was a gradual process, but there were a couple of things that then happened. It'll only take me about 2 hours to explain.
Please.
Okay. I had a headmaster in my high school who was Denmark's most important pacifist. And he wrote books about nuclear weapons and why we should avoid them. And he and his wife had been, and that's a very important thing in Danish history, had been the organizers with friends about securing that 7,000 Jews could get out of Denmark and in safety to Sweden. And that was risking their own lives. So that was, he talked about these things. He had met Einstein, he had met Albert Schweitzer. His name was Oberg. And so as a young man, 16, 17 years old, I began to listen to that there were other ways of thinking, right? That was during the Vietnam War years. And then I began to study sociology, and I ran into two persons who have changed my life. One was Håkan Wiberg in Sweden, who became my advisor on my PhD, who was a peace researcher. And then, if you will, one of the founders, perhaps the most important founder of the academic study called Peace and Conflict Research, Johan Galtung from Norway, who died a couple of years ago, 93 years old. And so I was planning to become an industrial sociologist. I was interested in what makes people happy at their workplace and things like that. And then I began to, thanks to these people's inspiration, I began to see that sociology can be applied to the global society and not just to families or factories or my national society. So it opened my vista, if you will, of the world. And actually, Johan Galtung was the director of a research center in Yugoslavia. So the three of us were quite knowledgeable, but I was a young guy and they were older professors. They were quite knowledgeable about Yugoslavia. So when we had started our foundation, and for 5 years we'd done theoretical studies and published books, I got the idea, let's go to a conflict area and see whether we can do something practical, not just studying theories and writing books, but can we be helpful and do conflict mitigation where things are falling apart. And at that time, all the 90s, up till NATO's bombing in 99, Yugoslavia was falling apart. And that is my third country. It's meant so much to me to be in Yugoslavia and work in Yugoslavia. So, long story short, the wars in Yugoslavia made me totally convinced how stupid war is, how devastating it is, how many wounds it gives people, how much trauma it creates. And I taught young people at reconciliation seminars, Serbs and Croats, crying together because they had experienced the same of their parents killing each other's parents, right? And then I must say the worst I've seen in the world was when I was in Aleppo, eastern Aleppo, Syria, in December 16. I cannot describe, without being very emotional about it, the destruction I saw of that beautiful place, which, by the way, was on the historical Silk Road. Aleppo was second large, and Damascus, Syria, was the last point of the Silk Road in that part of the world. And that destruction was so, I've seen Vukovar, I've seen other places, but I tell you, this was extraordinary in terms of total destruction. I walked through streets where you walk in about half a meter of belongings to people. They have thrown it out because they had to run away and just take the most important, like passport and their jeans and whatever, and their kids, of course, with them, but had thrown out everything else. Now, I was there the days in which the Syrian government and the Russians liberated eastern Aleppo from al-Nusra. That means America and Western-supported terrorists who had occupied eastern Aleppo for 4.5 years. And I saw these children coming out after 4.5 years. That means, in many cases, more than half of their lives. They had lived in warfare. And those eyes I will not forget, because these children, let's say 5-10 years, they had seen more bad things that any human being should see in a whole lifetime.
Yes.
So I have intellectually, I knew violence was a bad idea because I read basically a lot of what Gandhi wrote, and I've studied nonviolence of other theoreticians and Gene Sharp and whatever. But seeing the reality, that convinced me 110% that there's the most useful, the most necessary, the most meaningful life you can live is to work for peace.
Yes.
And peace means that these children, there should not be any children who see this, and that grieves my heart to, see what's happening now in Gaza and elsewhere. It's done by people who don't know what war is. Those of us like UN people also who've been there can see how stupid it is, how immoral it is, how disgusting it is that we have no more respect for human lives. And we can even become big statesmen or lead nations or think we should have the Peace Prize even if we have killed enough people, right? Yes. These kinds of things have made me a dissident of the system, if you will.
Yeah.
I must say one more thing is, I did my military service, only partly 3 months and with bayonet learning how to kill. But after I served done my military duty, I wrote to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense in Denmark and say, this was the most meaningless thing I've done in my life, and if you call me up and there's a war, don't expect me to turn up.
You deserve compensation for your time.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I didn't ask them anything. I just said, don't count on me in the future. So that was a time, when ministries were supposed to also write you a letter back. And the letter kind of said in between the lines, it's not a great loss for Danish defense that you will not turn up, because I was not a good soldier.
Well, I think that's something to be proud of. And I think you should be proud of also of being a dissident of this system, because it is brutal.
Yeah, you cannot be.
Exactly.
You cannot not be if you've seen it.
Exactly. And I think it's so important that you have seen it for yourself. But what is absolutely devastating is that this violence is not a thing of the past. It is happening right now, currently, as we speak, despite the ceasefire. And so that is something that I wanted to talk to you about, as we explore these notions of peace. We've also been bombarded with imagery of violence, of destruction, of genocide that is currently, or that has been happening in Gaza for over 40 years, but more so in the last 2 years. And so, I think we have this peace agreement that has been conjured up by Donald Trump. And I think the air quotes here are very, very important, because Donald Trump is heralding himself as a master of peace in the Middle East, which is absolutely disturbing because, as you just said, in Syria, this has been happening for a long time. The U.S. has been bombarding the Middle East
and work with
West
the terrorists.
Asia, and working
while
with
officially
terrorists.
saying we're fighting terrorism.
Exactly, for such a long time now. And yet, in the same breath, those same Americans, that same American administration can step up and say, but we are the peacekeepers here. And I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on the current, just what is happening and Trump's self-declared peacekeeping, and whether you think America can even open its mouth and call itself that. I mean, we know the answer is no, but I'd love to hear you elaborate.
Well, Mimi, you're raising a question which has so many dimensions. You're probably aware of that. Let me try to take one at a point. First of all, a polemical comment. It's quite incredible that the Western world, the US in particular, cannot see, but the whole Western world cannot see that it's a genocide in Gaza. But America has been arguing for years that what happens in Xinjiang is a genocide with concentration camps, right? I was there for 1 week, traveled around, saw everything in Xinjiang last year. And of course, it's total bullshit in the sense that this is going to be probably the most interesting region in China in the future, connecting the West and China. But that's a long story. We're not going into this. But it's funny that you cannot see a genocide that is televised for two years, more than that, roughly 2 years.
Just about.
But you can invent one which did not happen. Secondly, it was two different ways of fighting terrorism. The Americans decided after 9/11 to fight terrorism all over the world. First throwing themselves over Afghanistan. If I remember correctly, actually the 7th of October. very soon after 9/11 had happened in 2001. And China, which said, we're going to re-educate these people and give them a better life so they stop being terrorists. I'm not saying it's probably not very nice to sit in a Chinese prison somewhere because you've done bad things, but I've been to the documentation center museum / in Urumqi, and I've seen the illustrations, the photographs, the documentation of about, 1,100, 1,200 terrorist attacks over more years than that. But long story short, the US as a peacemaker is an element of what I now call the impossibility of rational analysis. I grew up with academic studies. You could study political science, international relations, doctrines. There were textbooks and these things. And you could become a reasonably intelligent, well-read person. But it was based on the precondition that what happened in the world was kind of rational decision-making, which I would say it was to a certain extent in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, not the last 20 years. Today you need social psychology, you need psychiatry, you need probably a bit of religious studies, theology, thinking about eschatology, the end visions. How does these people who talk about nuclear weapons and war, how do they think about the end of the system? And so I have concluded that we are not living in a rational world anymore. We are run by our leaders. Of course, there are exceptions, but now I'm taking it grosso modo. We are run by people, led by people, misled by people who are elements of what I would call kakistocracy. And kakistocracy is the opposite, if you will, of aristocracy or meritocracy, in the sense that it means governance by the least able and least good people. It's a political science. Nobody knows the word kakistocracy, but that's what it means. And that means, when geopolitical analysts sit and talk at length on videos about, trying to, with rational kind of theories, to discuss on understanding or interpret what is happening in the world, I say they're missing the point. They're using tools to understand something that doesn't exist anymore, namely rational decision-making. It's impulsive, it's emotionalist, it's irrational. It is most of the decision-making in the Western world now, both in the military and civilian, but particularly, when it comes to the area of warfare, confrontation, is run by haphazardly, quickly. We got to retaliate, we got to hate, we got to threaten, we got to confront, we got to do this and that, and nobody is able to make an analysis first and then discuss what is wise to do. And that means awfully bad politics. Yes. Let me give you an example. The country Sweden, where I live, was a totally different country when I came to it 52 years ago and started living there. But in no time, basically without any analysis, with very little public discussion in the media, Sweden decided to scrap 200 plus years of neutrality, which has served it well, and gave it a freedom to act as a small state in the international system, and scrapped it in a few months and joined NATO. Now, on top of that, which many people don't know, Sweden bilaterally was forced to accept or accepted 17 military bases on Swedish territory. The Finns got 15 American bases. The Norwegians got 7, 8 bases, and Denmark got 3. That means 42 military bases in Scandinavia. Now, that was on top of the NATO membership. So these things happened, and they happened in a completely undemocratic way, because the Minister of Defense is sent over to Pentagon, signs a 10-year binding contract that we will accept 17 bases in Sweden. Half a year later, it comes up in the parliament and is passed through, because the media has made it, Russians are coming to eat our children tomorrow morning, so we better join and have NATO bases, right? There's no analysis. It's all emotionalism. People like me who say, hey, wait a minute, there could be some problems with joining NATO, do not have access to the media anymore. Yeah. I know it because I know how it works. They call you and they want to say they want an interview. and the person who has called you up or contacted you goes up to a higher level and never comes back to the idea of an interview. That's how it works. That's how it works. And so the question of US as a peacemaker is bizarre, because the United States is a country that since 1945 has murdered most people around the world. It's the most armed country in human history. It is a country with, depending on how you define a military base, has between 600 and 800 plus military bases around the world. That in itself is a perversity in 130 or 40 countries. And it's a country that runs NATO, the most militarized deterrence offensive organization on earth, with the largest military expenditures per country, if you will, per capita. And so you're in a situation now where the expansion of NATO is the root cause of the war in Ukraine. I'm not defending, by what I said now, that Russia invaded Ukraine. I wrote an article the day after it had happened and said that was a surprise to me, and I don't think it was a good idea. Okay, because also it's a violation of the UN Charter and all that. But I can understand why they felt pressed. And the story is very simple. There were all important Western leaders who told Russia that we will not expand NATO 1 inch if you, Gorbachev, the last president of the Soviet Union, accept that we unite East and West Germany as one country, and that one country will remain in NATO, that Eastern Germany will become NATO too. And he said, that's okay.
But they crossed the line.
Then they cheated him, of course, because Ukraine became, I think, country number 11 in that expansion. And Putin had said, I cannot accept it. We see it as a threat, like the Americans saw Russian missiles on Cuba in 62 or 63 as a threat, although that's much further away. And this, I used to say jokingly, but fairly accurately, if any Western country had been situated where Russia is situated and had, antagonistic enmity alliance coming up that way, they would have beaten back long ago. Russia has been very tolerant in waiting, but has also warned for 15 years not to do this. Add to that the wonderful, charming Obama,
also a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Also a Nobel Peace Prize winner, was the one who masterminded. It was his administration and Madame Nuland and the American ambassador at the time in Kiev who masterminded the regime change in 2014. After which, immediately, CIA were all over the country. After which, they built the army. After which, they killed 15,000 Russians in Donbass and elsewhere, right? So, if you put these things together, what I've just done now is what you cannot read in the media.
Yes.
In the media this was an out of the blue, full-scale invasion, unprovoked invasion of Russia into, and look what these guys can do. Yes. Because that is a distortion of history. And secondly, it's a distortion of war without taking underlying conflict serious. Yes. The underlying conflict is between NATO and Russia. Ukraine has nothing to do with it. Yes. Ukraine is a place that both NATO and Russia agrees that they can use to fight out their conflict. If we could go in and say, hey, how do we shape a European security and peace system? How do we make a European United Nations where we can talk about problems we may have with each other? We could, in my view, and I wrote about, our foundation published stuff about that, when the Berlin Wall had come down, Soviet Union had dissolved, Warsaw Pact was gone, there was no reason to keep NATO. We said it at that time. And I know that from a personal experience because I was writing my doctoral dissertation in the late 70s, early 80s. I'm a doctor from 82. And I wrote it about Danish security in a global perspective. And I went down to NATO and interviewed generals and officers, and they all told me two things. One, NATO exists because we don't want a repetition of the Second World War. It must never happen again. That's fine. I agree with that. Two, our raison d'etre, the reason we are here and still here is that we see Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union as a competitor and a dangerous potential enemy in the future. So we are here to guard our own society, right? right? And then the raison d'etre disappears and the wall comes down.
Yes.
And
NATO still exists.
And they're not only still there and not only still being defensive, they begin to say we should exist and we should expand. And so if you read, which very few people have done, if you read the Treaty of NATO, you and I could sign that today. It's totally defensive.
Yeah.
It says we are a group of countries which shake hands, promise each other that if one of us is attacked by somebody outside, from outside, we will come together and help that guy, one of our members, right? And all conflict shall be transferred to the United Nations. This is a peace treaty.
Yeah.
Now, they got out of their minds, thought that because the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact was gone, they could do whatever they please. And that's what they did in Yugoslavia. Bombing the place to hell, carving up a country which had many problems, but this was not the way to do it. And carving out Kosovo and getting an independent Kosovo because the Americans wanted to build the largest military base they had built outside the United States since Vietnam. And I happen to know a little bit about it because I was a mediator for 4 years in the Kosovo conflict with 3 governments in Belgrade. And I was a personal advisor to the nonviolent, decent leadership of Kosovo, Dr. Rugova and his people around him, who said, we want an independent Kosovo. We don't want to be part of Yugoslavia and Serbia, but we will never use weapons. He was a literary critic, a decent man, not a violent guy. And so the Clinton administration invented that Milosevic were trying to do a genocide on the Albanian people. Now, those of us who were there at the time knew that this was a lie.
Yeah.
But that was, again, genocide could be used. Again, genocide here, genocide there as a pretext for whatever. And he said, you may remember his speech in which he said, Europe has now gotten a new Hitler. His name is Slobodan Milosevic. He could hardly pronounce his name correctly. Now, I happen to have met Milosevic. I happen to know all the leaders in Belgrade and the leaders in Kosovo. I spent 4 years of my life. And what we did was to produce a peace plan for a negotiation, not a peace plan, but a plan for a negotiated solution. We never said what it should be the result. We just said, here is a structure in which you can sit down and discuss how to solve this problem, whether you want to be a protectorate or you want to be an autonomy or you want to mutually, whatever. We never said what it should be, and that's the wisdom of China also. China has not gone in and said what the solution should be in Ukraine, because that's up to Ukraine and Russia and Europe to find out. But as I said, there could be framework things we have to stop the war, we have to have humanitarian aid, we have to have a structure for negotiations, etc. That's what an intelligent peacemaker does. And then comes in a mediator, and the mediator interviews all the parties in a conflict, which are many more than we know normally, and ask people 2 questions. What are you afraid of? What do you think happened? Why did it happen? And what could you live with? What do you want in the future? I mean, these are, I wouldn't say simple things because it's hellishly complex when you sit in the situation physically with lots of people, right? But making peace is a science and an art. The art part of it is that in order to discuss solutions, you have to have a view of a possible potential future. Yes. You have to seduce, if you will, in quotation mark, people into saying, what kind of relationships, what kind of society would you like to have in the future that you would prefer to have rather than continue the war? Give people better opportunities and war, and they will say yes.
Yeah.
Nobody's doing that today. Nobody is doing that today. Nobody has asked the Russians. Nobody has asked the Ukrainians. Nobody has asked the Europeans, how could you live together in peace with each other? What is the model here? Yeah. And I say economic zone. I say make southern Ukraine a new Chechen, development, high-tech, whatever. They have the enormous technological and economic development also in Ukraine. Make Ukraine perhaps a new Switzerland. Move the United Nations headquarters to Kiev. The US cannot be a host anymore of that organization, the way they mistreat their host role. I mean, you can discuss it. The moment, if you cannot envision the future, some kind of future, and discuss what would you like, you cannot make peace. That's why I'm saying it's a science. There are certain rules for what you do, a rational thinking. How do you go about making peace? Like a doctor would say, I know something from my medicine books. Now I'm doing surgery on this patient. I got to know a little bit about where to cut and where to do things right. But you have to have a vision of the future, of the patient's future when I've done it, and the conflicting patients, what kind of life they could live, which would be better than continuing the war. I would say it is so simple compared to just letting the war continue. What is happening now is an intellectual and moral disgrace of all parties. And then you're back to the question of Gaza, which I jokingly say Trump would probably come to call it Las Vegasa.
Oh, yikes.
You see, I mean, you have to, black humor can help a little bit sometimes, because the world is
that's exactly
treasure.
what he wants to do, yes.
Yeah. And you're back to that because here you have a guy who has no idea about how to talk with the parties, who is the major participant in the conflict due to the US support of Israel, which means the only country, not the only country, but that country definitely cannot be a mediator, because per definition, a mediator is somebody who is neutral. Yeah. A mediator is a person or an organization or a country that has no interest in a particular outcome, but has an interest in helping the parties to find an outcome they can live with. So the idea that the US and Trump can be a mediator is totally hilarious. I'm surprised to see that you have even intellectuals and good scholars who seriously sit and talk about this totally fake peace plan, in which he thinks he himself, together with war criminal Tony Blair, should run the future of Gaza. Excuse me, I don't know what is worse, to have to be forced out of Gaza or be run by these guys in the future. I'm not sure that the people who are returning now to Gaza, of course they do that because it's their home. I'm not saying this wrong. But they will wake up one day and see, we have Trump and Blair and some other crooks and criminals. Sorry for my language, but that's what it is.
Yes.
War criminals running our country. The fact, again, we're back to what I call peace and conflict illiteracy. Yeah. The fact that you have serious media who discusses this, an intellectual, who discusses this as if it was not a joke. It is a joke. It's a waste of time to talk about this peace plan, in my view.
Yes.
Sorry if I sound a little bit radical.
You don't, because
I'm an independent person. I'm not paid by anyone, and I can say what the heck I want and think is right.
You can, and you're an actual rational person sitting in front of me saying this to me.
I just know a little bit about peace.
And thank you so much, everybody, for watching this episode of Roughly Chinese. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know what else you'd like us to discuss in the future. Bye.
Bye.
And what a ride it's been here on China Now. So many moving pieces, shifting narratives, and bold conversations shaping the story of China today. My name is Makiza Latifa, and it's always a thrill bringing you these insights and voices that help us see the world and China a little differently each time. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. You can share with me your comments, your thoughts, feedback, and suggestions for the coming episodes of the show through the email provided below. So until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and join us again for more stories that keep you connected to the pulse of China. See you soon.